72 hours. That was the precise duration of my silent retreat. I unlocked the time lock safe at exactly 6 in the evening, expecting client emails for the forensic audit I was finalizing. Instead, my screen pulsed with a single frantic security alert from my front door. I pressed play. The video was grainy, filtered through the relentless gray rain of the Pacific Northwest. There was my brother Robert. He was dragging his 3 children out of a black sedan, shoving a wad of cash at the driver and pointing at my dark, empty cabin. Then he walked away. The car drove off. The children stood there shivering in the freezing downpour. I looked at the timestamp in the corner. 4 days ago. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed the man who left his own children in the rain, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Are you team forgive family or team cut them off? I want to know who's standing with me today. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone. Panic is an inefficiency I couldn't afford. Instead, I did what I always do when the numbers don't add up. I audited the data. I rewound the footage. Pause. Zoom. Enhance. My cabin is located on Cedar Ridge Road. It is a paved, well-lit street, lined with vacation rentals. But the sign in the background of the video, barely visible through the sleet, didn't say road. It said drive. Cedar Ridge Drive is a desolate logging access route 4 miles north. It has no streetlights, no cell service, and no neighbors. Just dense timber and bears. My brother hadn't just abandoned his children at my doorstep. He had dropped them in the middle of a wilderness dead zone because he couldn't be bothered to verify a GPS coordinate. I sat down at my desk. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I pulled up the map. 0 variance. The mistake was undeniable. He had endangered 3 lives because of a clerical error. But I knew deep in the cold pit of my stomach that this wasn't just an error. It was a punishment. To understand why a father would leave his children on a logging road in a storm, you have to understand the ledger of our relationship. For 34 years, Robert has been a liability masquerading as an asset. He is the golden child, the tech visionary with the blinding smile, and the portfolio of failed startups. I am the younger sister, the forensic accountant, the one who cleans up the spilled ink. When his fintech app crashed, I paid the legal fees. When his crypto wallet was hacked, I covered his rent. I was the silent investor in the business of keeping Robert solvent. But last week I closed the account. It was Thursday evening. I was prepping for the biggest case of my career, a state-level fraud audit that required absolute hermetic focus. I had arranged for a timed lockbox for my phone and laptop. I was going dark for 72 hours, no distractions, no exceptions. Then my phone rang. It was Robert. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about my work. He went straight to the transaction. He told me he had a last-minute meeting with a venture capital firm in San Francisco. He needed me to take Christopher, Olivia, and Dakota for the weekend. He said it was a career maker. He said he needed this. I looked at my calendar. I looked at the stack of files on my desk. For the first time in my life, I didn't calculate how much of myself I could afford to lose. I just said, no. I told him I was going off-grid. I told him I would be unreachable. I told him clearly and concisely that I could not be his safety net this time. The silence on the other end wasn't empty. It was heavy with entitlement. He laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. He told me I was being selfish. He told me that family supports family. He tried to leverage guilt like a currency, reminding me of every birthday he'd attended, every scrap of affection he'd thrown my way. But I held the line. I told him to hire a sitter. I told him to ask his ex-wife. I told him no. He hung up without saying goodbye. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he would fold, find another solution, or maybe even cancel his trip. I didn't know that for Robert, a refusal isn't a boundary. It's an insult. And insults require retaliation. I looked back at the screen at the timestamp frozen on the image of his retreating taillights. He knew I wasn't there. He knew I wouldn't answer the door. He sent them anyway. He rolled the dice on his own children's safety, just to force my hand to prove that his need was greater than my no. I picked up my landline, the only line out. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Robert. I dialed the local sheriff's department. My voice didn't shake. It was as cold and hard as the ice on the window. I wasn't reporting a family dispute. I was reporting a crime. The drive to the sheriff's station was a 40-minute descent through a tunnel of Douglas firs and dense, suffocating fog. My windshield wipers slapped against the glass, a metronome counting down the seconds since my life had bifurcated into before and after. I had my phone plugged into the dashboard, watching it resurrection itself from the dead battery. When the screen finally lit up, it didn't just ping, it screamed. 73 missed calls, 42 text messages, 8 voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to hear the audio to know the frequency of the hysteria. I just read the previews scrolling down the glass. They were from my mother, Patricia, and my father, Thomas. "Brianna, pick up. Robert said you're not answering the door. How could you do this? They are children, Brianna. We know you're busy, but you promised him. If anything happens to them, I will never forgive you." I pulled over to the shoulder of the logging road, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires. I stared at the messages, letting the narrative assemble itself in my mind like a reconstructed balance sheet. Robert hadn't just dropped them off. He had preloaded the story. He had called our parents days ago, probably from the airport lounge while sipping a whiskey sour, and told them a lie so audacious it was almost impressive. He told them I had agreed. He told them I had said yes to the babysitting, yes to the favor, yes to being the good little sister. He told them I was expecting the kids. So when I didn't answer the door, I wasn't the victim of a crime. I was the villain. I was the negligent aunt who had ghosted her family and left innocent children stranded in the cold. He had weaponized their worry and aimed it squarely at my head. I sat there, the heater humming against the chill, and I dissected the psychology of it. Why? Why go to such extreme, dangerous lengths? Why risk his children's lives just to attend a gambling ring in San Francisco? In my line of work, we look for patterns. And in behavioral psychology, there is a term for what Robert did. It is called an extinction burst. Imagine a rat in a cage. For years, every time the rat presses a lever, it gets a pellet of food. Press lever, get food. Ask Brianna, get money. Demand help, get rescued. It is a reliable, unbroken contract. But then one day the lever stops working. I said no. I cut the supply. When the reinforcement stops, the subject doesn't just walk away. They panic. They press the lever harder, faster, more violently. They attack the mechanism. They escalate their behavior to catastrophic levels to force the environment to respond. Robert wasn't just being lazy. He was trying to break the machine until it gave him what he wanted. By abandoning his children in a dangerous location, he was creating a crisis so severe that I would be forced to react. He was manufacturing an emergency to reestablish his control, to prove that my boundaries were nothing compared to his chaos. It was a power move, a lethal, calculated power move designed to punish me for the audacity of autonomy. I scrolled to the bottom of the text thread. Past the panic of my parents, past the confusion. There was one message from Robert. It was sent 3 hours after the drop-off. Next time, pick up the phone. You did this. I stared at those 3 words. You did this. He wasn't worried. He wasn't frantic. He was smug. He believed that by the time I saw this, I would have already caved, picked up the kids, and cleaned up his mess, just like I had cleaned up his tax fraud and his rent arrears. He thought I was at home hiding and that he had called my bluff. He didn't know I was 4 days late. He didn't know the lever wasn't just broken, it was gone. I took a screenshot of the text. Then I put the car in drive. I wasn't going to call my parents to explain. I wasn't going to defend myself against his fiction. I was going to the police, and I was going to hand them the architect of his own destruction. The sheriff's station was a low brick building that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Officer Keene met me in the lobby. I knew her from the Rotary Club, a woman with iron gray hair and a gaze that could peel paint. She didn't ask for pleasantries. She took me straight to the back. There, in a small, brightly lit room, sat the collateral damage of my brother's ego. Christopher was sitting on a plastic chair, his legs swinging inches above the floor, his face a mask of stoic terror. Olivia was curled into a ball on a beanbag chair, clutching a stuffed bear that looked like it had been dragged through mud. And little Dakota was asleep in a playpen, his thumb in his mouth, his cheeks streaked with dried tears. They were dry now. They were warm. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had found them, was sitting with them, murmuring soft reassurances. But the shadow of the last 4 days hung over them like a physical weight. Aunt Bree. Christopher's voice cracked. It was the sound of a child who had been forced to be an adult for 96 hours. He slid off the chair and ran to me. I fell to my knees just in time to catch him. He hit my chest with a force that knocked the wind out of me, his small arms wrapping around my neck in a vice grip. Olivia followed, burying her face in my shoulder. "I'm here," I whispered over and over, rocking them back and forth. "I'm here, I've got you." "Daddy said you were coming." Christopher sobbed into my coat. "He said you promised." "We waited, Aunt Bree. We waited so long." It got dark and Olivia was scared and the man in the car left and we didn't know where to go. Every word was a dagger. He said you promised. Robert hadn't just endangered their bodies. He had assaulted their trust. He had used my name, my love for them, as the bait to lure them into a trap. He had made me the architect of their abandonment in their eyes. I pulled back and looked at Christopher. His eyes were red-rimmed, haunted. I wiped the tears from his cheeks with my thumbs. "Listen to me," I said, my voice fierce and low. "I did not know you were coming. Your father lied to you. I would never ever leave you in the rain. Do you hear me? Never." He nodded, the tension in his small shoulders slowly uncoiling. But the fear was still there, a deep, vibrating hum. Mrs. Henderson stood up, her face etched with a mixture of relief and anger. "They were huddled on the porch," she told me quietly. "Soaking wet. Dakota was blue, Brianna. Blue. They didn't want to come with me at first because they were afraid your brother would be mad if they weren't there when you got home." My blood turned to ice. They were afraid he would be mad. Even in their terror, they were conditioned to manage his emotions, to prioritize his approval over their own survival. That was when the shift happened. Up until that moment, I had been operating on cold, analytical rage. I was the forensic accountant auditing a fraudulent ledger. But looking at Dakota's sleeping face, seeing the raw trauma in Christopher's eyes, the math changed. This wasn't about balance sheets anymore. It wasn't about teaching Robert a lesson or proving a point. This was war. I looked at Officer Keene, who was standing by the door, her expression grim. "I want to file charges," I said. "Child endangerment. Negligence. Whatever sticks." "We're already building the case," she said. "But we need to find him. We've tried his cell, his known associates. He's gone dark." "I know where he is," I said. "He's in San Francisco. Or he was." I stood up, keeping a hand on Christopher's shoulder. I looked at these 3 children, my blood, my heart, and I made a vow. Not a promise, a vow. A promise can be broken. A vow is etched in bone. For years I had been the enabler. I had been the one who softened the blows, who covered the tracks, who made sure Robert never hit rock bottom, because I was afraid of what the crash would do to the family. I thought I was helping. I thought I was keeping the peace. But looking at the bruises on Olivia's shins and the terror in Christopher's eyes, I realized the truth. I hadn't been protecting them. I had been protecting him. I had been shielding the monster so he could grow strong enough to devour us all. No more. I wasn't going to be the safety net anymore. I was going to be the wall. And if Robert wanted to crash against me, he was going to break. "I need a computer," I told Officer Keene. "And I need access to a secure line." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to find him," I said. "And I'm going to make sure he never hurts these kids again." I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't tell her that I wasn't just going to find him. I was going to dismantle him. I was going to take every lie, every financial shortcut, every fraudulent loan he had ever buried, and I was going to drag it into the light. I was going to audit Robert Sterling until there was nothing left but the truth. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch the kids at her house while the officers processed the paperwork. It was a temporary fix, but it bought me time. Time to do what I do best. I sat in a cubicle at the station, a borrowed laptop humming in front of me. Officer Keene had granted me limited access under the pretext of assisting with the investigation into Robert's financial whereabouts. She didn't ask too many questions, she just wanted him found. I started with the basics: bank accounts, credit cards, the usual suspects. Robert's primary checking account was overdrawn by $6,000. His business account for Sterling Tech Ventures had been closed by the bank 3 months ago for suspicious activity. His credit cards were maxed out mostly on cash advances and online gambling sites. It was a disaster, but it was a predictable disaster. Then I dug deeper. I ran a search on my own social security number. In my line of work, identity theft is common. We see it every day. Strangers stealing numbers to buy cars to open lines of credit. But when I saw the hits come up, the breath left my lungs in a rush. There were 3 loans taken out in the last 6 months. High-interest short-term crypto loans from offshore lenders. Total value $210,000. The applicant's name was Brianna Sterling. The address was my old apartment. The employment verification was forged, using my pay stubs from 2 years ago documents I had given Robert when I helped him file his taxes. He hadn't just gambled his own money, he had gambled mine. He had leveraged my credit, my name, my financial future to fuel his addiction. He had bet my life on a hand of virtual poker. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. It was grand larceny. He had stolen my identity to fund the very lifestyle that had led him to abandon his children. Every dollar he lost was a dollar I would be on the hook for. Every debt he accrued was a shackle around my ankles. The VC meeting in San Francisco wasn't about funding a startup, it was about paying off a shark. He was desperate. He was drowning, and he had decided to use me as his life raft even if it meant pulling me under with him. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert. Just landed. Meeting went great. Heading back tomorrow. Kid's good. The audacity was breathtaking. He was playing the part. He was pretending the drop-off had gone smoothly, that the kids were safe with me, that his lies were holding. He had no idea the police were building a case. He had no idea I was looking at the evidence of his felony fraud. I didn't reply. I forwarded the loan documents to Officer Keene's secure email. Then I pulled up the flight manifests. He wasn't heading back tomorrow. He was booked on a red-eye tonight. He was running. He knew the loan sharks were circling, and he knew his time was up. He was coming back to Seattle not to pick up his kids, but to grab whatever cash he could find and disappear. I looked at the clock. 9:45 at night. His flight landed at 11:30. He would come to my house. He would expect me to be there, cowed and compliant, ready to hand over his children and maybe even lend him a few $1,000s to tide him over. He would expect the sister who always said yes. He was going to meet the sister who had learned to say no. I closed the laptop. Officer Keene, I said, standing up. He's coming home tonight. And he's coming to my house. We'll have a unit waiting, she said. No, I said. I want him to come inside. I want him to think he's safe. I want him to confess. That's dangerous, Brianna. He's a coward, not a fighter, I said. And I need him to admit it. I need him to say on the record that he knew I wasn't there. I need it for the custody hearing. I need it for Christopher. She looked at me for a long moment, assessing. Then she nodded. We'll be in the next room. We'll have audio. If he so much as raises his voice, we're coming in. Deal. I drove back to my cabin in the dark. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and black. I unlocked the door, the new deadbolt clicking with a heavy, satisfying sound. I turned on a single lamp in the living room. I set my phone on the coffee table recording app open. Then I waited. At 1:15 in the morning, headlights swept across the front window. A car door slammed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, heavy, uneven. He was drunk. Or high. Or just exhausted from the weight of his own lies. The doorknob rattled. He tried to open it without knocking. When he found it locked, he pounded on the wood. Bree, open up. It's freezing out here. I took a breath. I let the cold, analytical rage fill me up one last time. I walked to the door and opened it. Robert stood there, soaking wet, shivering, his eyes wild. He looked past me, scanning the room. Where are they? He demanded. Where are the kids? Come in, Robert, I said. We need to talk. He pushed past me into the living room, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. He smelled like stale gin and desperation. His eyes darted around the empty room, checking the corners, the hallway, the kitchen. He wasn't looking for his children because he missed them. He was looking for them because they were his leverage. Without them, he was just a man, standing in a puddle of his own making. Where are they, Brianna? He snapped, turning on me. Don't play games. I know you have them. Mom said you called the cops. Did you really call the cops on your own brother? I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I felt remarkably calm. My phone was recording on the table, a silent witness. The children are safe, I said. which is more than you can say. Safe, I sent them to you. You were supposed to be here. He was already rewriting history, trying to gaslight me in real time. I told you I had that meeting. I told you I was sending them. You agreed, Brianna. You said yes. I said no. I corrected him, my voice flat. I told you I was going off-grid for 72 hours. I told you I would be unreachable. You knew that. He scoffed, pacing the small room, leaving muddy tracks on the rug. I figured you'd come back. You always come back. You're the responsible one, right? The perfect little sister. I didn't think you'd actually leave them out there. You sent them to Cedar Ridge Drive, I said. Not road. Drive. It's a logging route, Robert. There are no lights. There are no houses. You dropped them in the wilderness. The driver got lost, he shouted, throwing his hands up. That idiot driver. I told him where to go. It's not my fault he's incompetent. Is that what happened? I asked. Or did you pick a spot that was far enough away from the neighbors, so no one would see you dumping them? He stopped pacing. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. The mask was slipping. The charming entrepreneur was gone. The cornered animal was surfacing. Why are you doing this? I came here to pick them up. I'm here, aren't I? Just give me the kids and I'll leave. I need to get out of town for a few days. Just until this blows over. You're not going anywhere, I said. And neither is the $200,000 you stole from me. He froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 loans, I listed them off, counting on my fingers. Crypto lenders. Offshore. High interest. You used my social security number. You used my tax returns. You forged my signature. I was going to pay it back, he exploded, the vein in his neck bulging. I just needed a bridge. The VC funding was coming through next week. I did it for the family, Brianna, to build something for us. You did it to play poker, I said. You lost it all. And when you realized you couldn't pay the sharks, you decided to run. But you couldn't run with 3 kids in tow. So you dumped them on me. You figured if I had them, I'd be too busy taking care of them to notice you were robbing me blind. He laughed, then a dark, ugly sound. You think you're so smart. You think you're better than me because you have a steady job and a 401k. You're nothing. You're just a bean counter. You have no idea what it takes to take risks. I know you knew I wasn't here, I said softly. This was it. The pivot point. You knew I was camping. You knew the cabin was empty. Of course I knew, he screamed, his control snapping. That was the point. You think you can just say no to me. After everything I've done, you needed a lesson, Brianna. You needed to feel what it's like to panic. I wanted you to come home and find them and realize that you can't just walk away from your family. I wanted you to hurt. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. The confession hung in the air between us, toxic and undeniable. He had endangered his children not out of necessity but out of spite. He had used their terror as a teaching tool for his sister. He seemed to realize what he'd said. He blinked, stepping back. I didn't mean that. I was just upset. Look, let's just get the kids. We can fix this. I'll talk to the driver. I'll tell him it was my fault. You don't need to talk to the driver, I said. I picked up my phone and tapped the screen. Because he's already talked to me. I held up the phone. On the screen was a video. It was dash cam footage from Seth's car. It showed Robert handing over the cash. It showed him leaning into the window. Just drop them at the driveway and go, Robert's voice said on the recording, clear as a bell. Don't wait around. My sister hates visitors. Robert stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing. He recorded it, I said. Seth felt weird about leaving kids in the woods. He kept the tape. He sent it to the police this morning. Robert looked at the door. He was calculating the distance. He was wondering if he could make it to his car before I stopped him. Don't bother, I said. The bedroom door opened. Officer Keene stepped out, her hand resting on her belt. 2 deputies came in from the kitchen. Robert Sterling, Officer Keene, said, her voice filling the small cabin. You are under arrest for 3 counts of child endangerment, identity theft, and grand larceny. Robert looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't look arrogant. He didn't look entitled. He looked small. Bree, he whispered. Please. Don't let them take me. I'm your brother. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stolen my name, endangered his children, and tried to break me just because I dared to exist outside of his control. I thought about Christopher crying in my arms. I thought about the rain. "I know who you are," I said. "You're a liability, and I'm writing you off." The legal dismantling of a human life is a lot like a bankruptcy proceeding. It is slow, it is paperwork heavy, and it is absolutely ruthless when the numbers don't add up. The arraignment happened 3 days later. My parents, Thomas and Patricia, were there in the front row. They weren't looking at Robert, who sat in the orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I had ever seen him. They were looking at me. Their eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and filled with a specific kind of accusation that only parents can manufacture. In the hallway during recess, my mother cornered me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about the grandchildren who had been abandoned in the woods. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and trembling. She told me I had to drop the charges. She told me that families handle things internally. She told me that ruining Robert's life wouldn't undo what happened, so why was I being so vindictive? She tried to cash in on 30 years of guilt, hoping I still accepted that currency. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my briefcase and pulled out a single red manila folder. I handed it to my father. Inside was the forensic trace on Robert's Sterling Tech Ventures account. I had followed the money all the way to the bottom of the drain. It wasn't just my identity he had stolen. I showed them the transfers, the unauthorized withdrawals from their joint retirement fund, the second mortgage taken out on their home under a forged power of attorney. Robert hadn't just bet my future, he had liquidated their past. I watched as my father read the lines. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving him looking old and hollow. The golden child facade didn't crack. It shattered. They realized in that moment that the son they were defending hadn't just made a mistake. He had been eating them alive for years. They didn't look at me again. They went back into the courtroom and sat down, but this time they sat on the prosecution side. The sentence was definitive. 5 years for child endangerment, 8 years for grand larceny and identity theft. Consecutive, not concurrent. The judge called his actions a profound moral bankruptcy. Robert didn't cry when the gavel came down. He just looked at me, his eyes empty, still trying to figure out how the math had gone so wrong. He lost everything. His freedom, his reputation, and most importantly, his rights. The custody hearing was brief. Jessica, his ex-wife, was granted full sole custody. I stood as her character witness. I pledged my financial support not as an enabler but as an aunt. I set up a trust for Christopher, Olivia, and Dakota. But this time I hold the keys. No one accesses that money without my signature. The family structure has been permanently altered. My parents are quiet now. They call me sometimes, their voice is tentative, respectful. They know I see everything. They know I kept the receipts. We are civil, but the warmth is gone. That is the price of the audit. The kids are in therapy. It is slow work. Christopher still hoards food in his room, afraid he might be left hungry again. Olivia panics when it rains. But they are safe. They are loved. And they know with absolute certainty that Aunt Bree answers the phone. I think a lot about why Robert did it. Why he risked everything on such a terrible gamble. In psychology, there is a concept called the currency of character. Most people think relationships are built on history or blood. They aren't. They are built on a credit system of trust. Every time you show up, you make a deposit. Every time you lie, you make a withdrawal. Robert viewed people as transactions. He thought he could exploit us indefinitely, that our love was an infinite line of credit with no interest rate. He didn't understand that when you go morally bankrupt, no amount of manipulation can bail you out. In his moment of absolute need, when he was cold and desperate on my porch, he reached for his credit, and he found out his balance was zero. I sat on the deck of my cabin this morning. The sun was shining on Cedar Ridge Drive. The woods were quiet. I checked my phone. No frantic texts. No emergency demands. Just a picture from Jessica of the kids eating ice cream. I locked my phone in the safe. I didn't need to check it. I had balanced the books. The debt was paid. And for the first time in my life, I was in the black. If you've ever had to choose between saving a family member and saving yourself, you know the price of that decision. Share your story in the comments. And if you believe that a child's safety matters more than a brother's ego, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.